Hi guys, so this is going to be around company briefings, and essentially what I'm going to kind of introduce what company briefings are, and then say, in my opinion, what I believe that you should have prepared before going into these company briefings, right? So company briefings are essentially specific banks that uh, your school has good relationships with are going to come on campus. They're going to give a 30 minute to like 1.5 hour presentation. Now, these can be on campus, right? Or they can be remote as well, right? Obviously, the banks that come on campus typically have a little bit of a stronger relationship with your particular school, but then there are some banks that do everything remote, right? So it's kind of up to you to judge. And in these company briefings, they're going to give a little bit of a presentation around why they're like a great bank. They're going to open it up for questions, right? So make sure that you have two or three kind of smart questions to ask them, and then from there. They typically have like the round tables, right? What we call like the circles of death, right? And that's where you're going to kind of engage with the bankers in a bit of like conversation and try not to like be super awkward, right? So a couple of like points on each one of those. I hope it's not super redundant from the last video, but in case you haven't seen the last video, the main thing is just don't ask too basic of a question, and then also don't ask a question that's a bit controversial, right? So don't ask about anything that could kind of come off as like controversial. Honestly, something like really pointed around like diversity. I wouldn't really ask about that. Or it's anything that anyone can take even like remotely any offense to. I would not ask that. Just ask generic, smart questions around the bank. Honestly, I don't think that you're going to learn much about any of these banks through a lot of these company briefings. It's more just a part of like the show, right? The main thing that you're going to learn is like what is kind of like the vibe, right? How are the people kind of there? What does it look like? The work culture is there. Does it seem like super like they're super driven, or do they look like kind of a little bit more like laid back? That's what you can kind of really judge. And if you can ask good questions around that aren't just like, oh, how would you describe the culture of the bank? That would be great, right? And then you also get a bit of information on that, and just make sure that you have a couple questions prepped. You don't want it to be silent when they ask, okay, does anyone have any questions? And then there's some banks that just come in and just take questions. They don't even have a presentation, right? So if that's the case, then make sure that everyone has plenty of questions ready. And then on the roundtables, yeah, just try to gauge what they want to talk about. If they want to talk about the fun things that they did on campus and kind of reminisce, then let them talk about that and talk to them more about that. Don't ask them about like, oh, like what is your bank doing in the consumer retail space? Like they don't want to talk about that most likely, right? And the main thing that I would have prepped before these company briefings is kind of like these, like the five big, like, I guess like these are like intro questions almost, right? So these are ones that I would have a like rehearsed and prepared answer to. And I guess I'll make videos on each one of these, right? So the first one is the typical like tell me about yourself, right? So it should be like maybe like 30 seconds, 30 to like, sorry, not 30. I would say like 60 seconds. 60 seconds of like basically telling them a little bit more around like your background, right? You want to have um, a good answer to why you want to go into investment banking, right? And have maybe like a 30 second, 30, 45 second spiel on that as well, right? And then you also want to have kind of a combination of the two, right? So one where your tell me about yourself kind of blends into your why investment banking, And then if they want to ask you, well, why investment banking, then you should have like an additional 30-second bit on that, right? So you could say something along the lines of, oh, this is kind of my background, blah, 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 but I was interested in investment banking because I want to do X, Y, and Z, right? And then they can be like, oh, well, tell me more around why you're interested in investment banking. And then you elaborate on points X, Y, and Z, right? Now, the third one is why this bank, right? So if you're recruiting um, at a particular bank, well, you want to have somewhat of like an answer around like, oh, why you want to work at that bank, right? Now, this one, it's much less likely that they'll ask you this, right? Because it's so early on in the process. But I think just having like a high level, like somewhat of an answer for this does would help you because this is possible that they just come out and ask you this. Now, will they ask you this like during the company briefing? No. During like the roundtables, most likely not, right? Unless they're like kind of weird and they're asking that for some reason. But a lot of companies, the same day that they have the company briefings and like the roundtables, they have like meetups with the bankers, right? So they'll run a company briefing from 10 to 11 a.m. And then from 11 to 5 p.m., they'll have kind of one-on-ones with the bankers or two-on-ones with the bankers. And in those, they definitely ask these, right? So um, just have these prepped, including like why you want to work at that bank, and the main purpose of like the company briefings is kind of preparing this question in particular, right? So try to figure out what your personal answer is going to be for why do you want to work at this bank in particular, right? And get a relationship going with like maybe one or two people, and you can say that, oh, Joshua mentioned this, right, about this bank, or Joshua mentioned that his favorite thing about the bank was this, and that really resonated with me, right? So something like that would be great. Now, this is one that I think needs um, quite a bit of thought and is a bit underrated, right? And that is your group selection, right? So in investment banking, you can work in many different groups, right? So you can do basically mergers and acquisitions, otherwise known as M&A, for technology companies. You can also do it for industrial companies. You can also do it in the financial institution space, right? So doing like bank mergers and insurance company mergers, or you can do it in all of these different like industries, right? So going into these company briefings and going into like some of these like very preliminary coffee chats, you need to know which groups that you're interested in, right? So have like two or three groups in mind. I would say like two is good at the very start, right? But three is probably a little bit better, and these are just going to be based off of kind of like where you're interested in, what your background like kind of aligns with most, and I'll make a separate video on kind of how I would go about selecting groups. But this is super important, and once you tell a bank that you are interested in, let's just say, technology and industrials, it's you're kind of sort of locked into to that, right? If you tell a bank early on in the process that you're interested in technology and industrials, what the bankers do is they take notes of that and they take it back. And then if later on in the coffee chat process you tell them that you're interested in consumer retail and FIG, right? FIG standing for financial institutions, well, that's not a great look, right? Because it seems like you're kind of indecisive. So I would say have these figured out before the company briefings. And then lastly, and this is also incredibly important, location, right? The bank is going to ask you, they could potentially ask you, which location are you interested in, right? And the safest one is obviously New York because every bank is there, right? But if you really don't want to work in New York, um, first off, make sure that the bank that you're telling this to has an office there. So if you, for example, want to work in San Francisco, right, make sure that the bank that you're talking to has an office in San Francisco and has a group in of what you're interested in in San Francisco, right? Same thing with like Chicago, same thing with like Houston, right? So if you tell a specific bank that, oh, I'm super interested in a technology and I want to work in Houston, well, they're going to be like, well, we don't have a technology group in Houston. Um, what do you want me to like? If they're nice, they'll be like, okay, what do you want me to put down? Right? Do you want to work in technology or do you want to work in Houston? And that's not a decision that you want to make while the banker is like staring at you in the face, right? And that's already like a bad look, right? So I would say have a pretty decent answer to these five questions. I would have them rehearsed. I would have them kind of written out and something that you've said like 100 times to yourself. And then I would feel pretty good kind of going into the company briefings along with like a couple questions prep for each bank. And yeah, just make sure you're not too awkward and like the round tables and you don't ask anything too risky. So overall, yeah, I would say that's all you kind of have to know around like company briefings. So I hope that's been helpful.